So there's no self. Let's start there. That's the beginning and the end and the middle of this, really. That's all we're here to talk about this afternoon. This contention, this description that there is no self. There certainly seems to be a self. There certainly seems to be a self for most of us. And essentially, I mean, this meeting is called non-duality, so it is, if you like, opposing itself to something called duality. And it's that sense that there's a self which gives rise to what is the, let's call it, the common experience of life. So common that it's neither noticed as something strange or special, nor usually commented on or talked about. It's so common, it's simply taken for granted. In other words, what I'm saying is that duality, as opposed to non-duality, is simply taken for granted by almost everybody. And that arises from the fact that there is a very strong sense, in spite of what I started this talk by saying, a very strong sense that there is a self. So what gives us, if you like, the normal experience of duality, something that most of us never think about, never comment on, simply take for granted, is that the experience of this, the experience of life, the experience of this, whatever this is always and unquestioned usually, of two things. And that is that there's an external world, that's one of the two things, and inside this external world and moving around in it, but separate from it, so this is a story of separation, is me, is the sense that there is a person here, a self here, an individual here, who is different to everything else. Now that self isn't there when we're born, but all the evidence seems to be that the self is not there when we're born. So we could say that we're born into oneness, or we're born into non-duality. And that for many of us, whether consciously or unconsciously, and for most of us, I would say unconsciously, our life, after a certain period of time, from when we're born, is really a search in some way or other to get back to that sense of oneness or non-duality into which we're born. So the contention is, and I'm fairly confident in this contention because even if I'm wrong you're not going to be able to prove it, is that basically the newborn baby has no concept of being separate from this. And when I say this, I just mean everything. So there's no concept of baby and cot, baby and mother, baby and dog, or whatever it might be. So we could say that we're all born into what's sometimes rather pompously called unity consciousness. We're not born into a state of duality where there's a feeling that I am separate from everything else. But fairly early on, we could kind of argue about what age it is, and there'd be no point in doing that. But at a certain age, the recognition for the baby begins to emerge of otherness, of something that isn't I, something that isn't me. So whatever it might be, let's say it's mummy, or it might be a mobile hung above the cot. I mean, who knows what it might be. But what we can say is that, by the age of about 1.5, something like that, might be earlier for some, might be later for others, a sense of duality has arisen. Hello.
Hi. Apologies.
Have you been before or not?
No.
No, I thought
First time.
Oh, right, okay, hi.
Good to meet you.
So whatever the age is, 1.5, whatever it might be, the emerging of a separate self happens, and it happens through that recognition that there isn't just experience, there's someone here having that experience. I mean, that's the heart of, the dual experience that is the kind of norm. There's someone here experiencing something else out there. So there's a here and there's a there, and I move through the there. And I begin to develop this sense at this very young age. And then after that, then the incredibly exciting and also incredibly traumatic business of being a person can start. And, I'm off on that great adventure, knocking up against all the other egos or selves or individuals or beings who believe themselves to be an individual, moving around in what appears to be an external world. I mean, what this afternoon is all going to be about is simply challenging all of that. But let's begin by acknowledging this is the common experience. And so you could say that, from a very early age, I set out on this great adventure of living something called my life. I'm a person in this external world. I have a life to live. There will be other apparent people, adults particularly, perhaps older brothers and sisters and things like that, who are very eager to teach me what this external world is about and how I should best live this very precious thing called my life. Which somehow I've been blessed with. It's like, we could say, there's kind of like a monumental collusion to keep this illusion going. But it's not really a collusion, because a collusion is something which is at least semi-conscious. It's not that at all. It's just that, you could say we're all fooled by the appearance. The appearance is me here in something called space, moving through something called time. Time beginning with my birth, ending with my death, or maybe not, depending on my belief systems. So here I am, I'm in, three-dimensional space, four-dimensional space-time, and it's real, and it's separate from me, and I'm real, and I'm separate from that, and all of this afternoon is about challenging that, and suggesting that for some of us, not necessarily for all of us, there may come a time when we begin to feel a bit suspicious of what's going on, and we begin to sense that, maybe all is not as it seems. Maybe there's some giant conspiracy, or maybe I just got it all wrong. Whatever it is, it may start in a more kind of conventional way to this, with perhaps an interest in exploring spiritual paths, something like that. I might start reading about, Osho or Ramana Maharshi. I might start studying Buddhism. I might start realising there are other views of the world, however strange they seem. Doesn't matter how it begins. For some of us, something happens that starts us on a journey of challenging what seems to be both a very powerful story, I'm a person and I have a life to live, and an experience, and my experience is of separation. I'm over here, you're over there. I got up in a previous time this morning and had a bowl of porridge, and I'm hopeful that if a sudden heart attack doesn't intervene, I may, if I'm lucky, I don't know, eat a curry tonight. So everything unfolds in time and space, with other people, other beings, maybe dog beings perhaps, but other beings. So this is challenging all of this, because what this is challenging is the very sense that there's a self or an individual separate person at the heart of this. That's all this is about. But it's not challenging it philosophically. I mean, it can do, if you like, we could do that, but that's not the point. The suggestion from here is, that this is challenging it by the suggestion that it can be recognised. I'm deliberately not using the word experience, And I might talk about why I'm doing that in a minute. But the suggestion here is that what I'm saying, it can be recognised. It can be recognised directly that there is no self here, and there is no self there or there. There is simply... I've stopped because words fail. So we'll use the inadequate words. There is simply oneness unfolding. There's simply non-duality unfolding. And I'll throw in a couple of things there which maybe we'll come back to, but I'll throw them in now. I've already mentioned them in passing. It's unfolding timelessly, and it's unfolding, I'm going to say, without space. I'm going to throw in here that when non-duality is seen, when this reality is seen, it's seen that there's no time. There is, if you like, only the eternal. Even to say now is a bit misleading, and there's no space. Space and time are a kind of construct of this apparent individual, just as the individual is only an appearance and is not ultimately real, so time and space are also an appearance and are not ultimately real. But I'm not talking philosophy here, I really need to stress this. I'm talking about the possibility of this actually being, just being recognised, being seen, being apprehended, if you like, very directly. So this whole sense that there's me here, and I bought this bottle of water, rather lovely bottle of water, in Tesco's today. It's just part of a story. It's part, if you like, of a drama. We reach for all sorts of metaphors and analogies to try to describe this. It's common to talk about this as a play. It's common to talk about it as being like a film. It's like a drama. Because when this is seen, it's seen that, in a sense it is. To think of this as a film is not a bad analogy, because a film, if it's a good film, is extremely convincing, very, very convincing, and there are these people going through these incredible dramas that are very important, and they can have us in tears, and they can have us laughing, and they can have us on the edge of our seats with excitement and so forth. And yet, if somehow we could step back from that, which actually with a film it's very easy to do, we recognise that it's all just a play of light. It's just a play of light. And that's another really good analogy, because this equally is, we could say, just a play of light. And that just is not to diminish it, it's just to make the difference between, this is not a three-dimensional, all-absorbing, all-important story of my life, which I take it to be. It's a play of light. If we're in a cinema and we get up close to the screen, we can see that. It'll just dissolve into just moving light. So the suggestions here is that what we're talking about is something that can be directly apprehended, directly realised, directly seen. None of those three words quite cut it, but it's the best we can do. Seeing this, I could say, if we're a seeker, and by that, in that sentence, if we're a seeker, I mean that in a very conventional way. If we're a spiritual seeker, let's say, if like me you have been or still are a spiritual seeker, we could say, this is what puts an end to seeking. But then we could then expand that word out and acknowledge that actually everybody, whether they recognise it directly, whether they apprehend it for themselves or not, everybody is actually a seeker. Everybody is seeking for something. We could say that we live as these separated, apparently separated humans, apparently moving around in this space that we do not own and does not belong to us and which we have to negotiate with. You know, that we are all seekers. It's just that the seeking may take many, many, many different forms, and some of them so hidden that we're certainly not going to associate them with spiritual seeking. So some of us are seeking for sex, some of us are seeking for the perfect car, the perfect job, more money, whatever it might be, security, running away from our trauma, whatever it might be, you know. But it's like seeking is a sort of like a fundamental rhythm to the one who lives in separation. Almost the same thing, we could say. In separation there is always a seeking. I mean, it's not always in the sense of constant, because sometimes we find, you know, the great love of our life, and the great love of our life might be a human being, a dog or a car, or the perfect job, or whatever it might be. And so for a time we feel satisfied and seeking seems to end, and yet, boy oh boy, do we know that eventually it just starts up again, no matter, you know, how beautiful the woman, the car, the dog or the job. Eventually it doesn't satisfy and seeking starts up again, because there's something inside us. We could say there's something inside us way beyond the personal, you know, that recognises that there's still something missing, that we still don't feel complete. Because we can't feel complete. In a way, we can't feel complete until our own personal identity has been seen through. And then there's sometimes two other things I throw in before finishing an introductory talk like this, so let's throw them in. And maybe the most challenging of all. So you may have heard this before many, many times. You may have read it or seen it on YouTube videos many times, people saying this. But ultimately the seeing of this is the seeing of emptiness and the seeing of stillness. But that emptiness, and there's no way of not making this sound paradoxical, but emptiness is full and stillness is moving. And another word you might hear associated with this is silence. And silence and noise are ultimately seen as the same thing, and stillness and movement are ultimately seen as the same thing. And they're seen as empty, devoid of form, as the Buddhists put it. That's what the Buddhists mean when they say devoid of form. I mean, empty. You know, the bus is going past, and the passengers are on the bus, and Piccadilly Circus is surrounding the bus, and it's all empty. It's all empty, and all that noise that's being made is silence, and all the movement is stillness. And ultimately, what really brings the final end to seeking is the recognition that it's all an outpouring of unconditional love. And of all the phrases and words I use this afternoon, I'm going to suggest that unconditional love is the most challenging. But it's seeing that this is, and however you want to put it, it doesn't matter, words will never get it. I'm saying this is an outpouring of unconditional love. You could say, you know, that it is sustained by unconditional love, or the foundation of it is unconditional love. It doesn't matter. But that's both, when it's seen, it's the most obvious thing, and it's the only thing that really puts an end to seeking. Nothing else. This is, you know, I mean, I'm prepared to be challenged about this one. Do challenge me on it if you want to, you know, but I'm going to go out of the... Is that a challenge coming from God there?
It's all right, it's an alarm.
It's okay. In extremis, you could throw it out of the window if it couldn't be switched off. So that may have been an alert from God. I'm not sure, but this. I mean, look at the state of the world. goodness me, I mean that's all I'm going to say. Don't even have to say anything else about it other than that one sentence. Look at the state of the world. How astonishing and in some ways ludicrous may it be, for somebody to sit in an armchair here in a room in Hampstead and assert that underlying everything is unconditional love. But I am asserting that. I'm asserting it unashamedly. And I'm also asserting that it is only the seeing of that that brings an end to seeking. When seeking has ended, what happens then? Well, anything can happen then. There's no rules. But seeking stops when it's recognised that there is unconditional love. Or if you like, this is an outpouring of unconditional love. And one last thing, Tony, and then we'll be open to... I always, throw in that phrase, unconditional love, it's not the word love that presents a problem here, because everybody in some way or other knows what love is, maybe in different, well, of course in different ways, but we all have an apprehension, everybody has an apprehension of what love is unless they're a psychopath. And if they're a psychopath, they're not going to be coming to a non-duality, so assume none of us are psychopaths. It's not difficult, we love whatever, we love a person, we love our dog, whatever it might be, but it's the word unconditional, because the mind cannot really get what unconditional love is, because the mind always lives in conditionality. And what that basically means, putting it in its most simplest, is, there's some things that I accept and there's some things that are beyond the pale. There's some things that I can love or conceive of loving, and there's other things that no way, not if hell froze over would I love that. It's too vile, it's too horrible, whatever it might be. So it's the word unconditional, it's the real challenge. I, as a person, living in separation as an individual with beliefs and opinions and likes and all of that glorious stuff, cannot love unconditionally. But the nature of this as unconditional love can nevertheless be seen. I think it's not important, nothing's important, so I'll say it's quite interesting to sort of stress that point, because if, like me, you spent some of the apparent years of your lives merrily having fun in the spiritual playground, I did a lot of that and it was great fun, but you come across a lot of concepts, particularly about love and unconditional love in the spiritual playground, which it's almost as if they're deliberately designed to give us spiritual and emotional indigestion. They're not, but that's just the effect they have. So we may come across it's very simple really. What happens is that in some way, whether subtly or not, the idea of a kind of universal love is at least subtly personalised. So I begin to feel that if you've been good spiritual seekers, you will have felt this, and if you've never felt it, then you're not good spiritual seekers, or maybe you're not spiritual seekers at all, but somehow unconditional love is my responsibility. It's my responsibility to open my heart more. Even to the tax man, even to the parking warden who gave me that ticket, it's my responsibility. And if I absorb this belief, which I probably will do if I'm a Buddhist or whatever it might be, then, I can torture myself for years with that. Because I've been practicing loving kindness meditation for years, and I still hate that parking warden or whatever. No, it's nothing to do with that. Unconditional love has nothing to do with the person. The person is not capable of it. So we can let it go, we can relax, we can forget about the spiritual indigestion. Unconditional love is simply what's seen when the person collapses, as, if you like, the underlying nature of whatever is. And what is? This. This is what is. This. What does that mean? Whatever's happening, whatever sensations are arising, whatever sound, whatever thoughts, whatever feeling of a hand, on a knee. Temperature of the room. Memory of where I came from, apparently this morning. That's what is. That's reality.
So I'm just aware of the hoo-ha factor in life, you know, but part of me absolutely agrees with everything you say. But there's another willful part which somehow just gets involved and, oh, this happened and that happened and this is disgusting and that's bad, and, or, you know, you just get caught up in this sort of whirlwind of stuff. And really this sheer helplessness of the individual in this situation, you know. On the one hand, I can recognise what you're saying, and I know exactly that it's dead right, but another part of me just gets caught up in this whirlwind of hoo-ha, you know? It's just, so we're just pretty helpless in that situation, aren't we, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's much worse than that, of course. I mean, you could say, conventionally speaking, we're pretty helpless, but of course, you know, actually there is no we, so that's just what's going on. There's a hoo-ha going on, and then there's a reaction to it.
So there's no me getting caught up in hoo-ha.
There's an apparent me getting caught up in hoo-ha, but it's an appearance, it's an illusion. Yeah. But while it's happening, of course, it feels bloody real. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
So how would you drop that me then?
Oh, if only I had an answer to that. So really, in a sense, I use the phrase, you know, the whole core of this is, too often, and I sort of name 40 different things, all of which can't be the whole core of this. So let's make this part of the whole core of this. You know, that this is the most obvious thing for the me to ask, but the me that's asking it is an illusion. It's not, it doesn't actually exist. So what does exist? Well, a thought or a thought feeling. A thought feeling, you know, I'm a me comes through, and then a question comes through. So how can this be dropped, or how can I drop myself? But the me doesn't exist. What can happen, however, and this is a complete mystery, and it's very frustrating that it's a complete mystery, is that we could say that I sense, right, which is unreal. Well, the sense is real, but the I is not unreal. I mean, the sense is a real phenomenon, but the I isn't real. That I sense can drop. We could say that, you know, what's really here is nothing appearing as everything, and nothing can suddenly recognise itself. Well, not necessarily suddenly. Nothing can recognise itself as empty. The self feels full, and yet that's an illusion, it's an appearance. And that appearance can drop, and then it can be recognised that the self is empty. It doesn't actually exist. So what does exist, and there's part of me that wants to say, you know, pay close attention to this, but there's another part of me that says, no, that's a bit misleading, because it sounds like, you know, oh, this is going to be a technique or something, and it isn't. You know, but nevertheless, it may be noticed that what may seem like this solid identity here is simply an ever-changing fluctuation of experiences. It's never the same for more than a few seconds. It seems solid. It's like, you know, it's like we think there's a mind.
Yeah.
We think it's my mind, but there isn't a mind. There is a constant changing flow of impressions and thoughts and feelings. But they're so insistent, they can feel, they often do feel, so insistent and so powerful that they create the impression that there's a mind, you see. Who is thinking these thoughts? I am thinking these thoughts. What does that mean? What's the, oh, it's a mind. My mind is thinking these thoughts. No, there's no mind. What we think of as the mind is just this ever-changing flow of experience, which includes feelings, thoughts and emotions. There's nothing behind that. And I feel like, making the obvious, it's not a pun, is it, but the obvious, there's nothing behind that, which means there's nothing behind it. It's like it's the divine nothing is giving rise to what seems to be a mind, but is actually just a continuing flow. The Buddhists are very good about this. I don't want to sort of, give out free advertising to a rival group. Yeah, they're not a rival group, it's okay. The Buddhists are pretty good at this, at explaining this. The mind is not a mind. It's a flow. It's a flow of energy. And that includes feelings. And that includes physical sensations and emotions.
So it's just sensation,
Um,
just touch, smell.
Well,
But you don't taste it, you don't touch
yeah,
it.
that's absolutely got it. Yeah, yes. There's sensation, but there's no one feeling that sensation. There's just feeling sensation. There's thoughts, but there's no thinker. Again, Buddhists put this very succinctly, the Buddha apparently put this very succinctly, actions there are, but no doer thereof. So we might say, thoughts there are, but no thinker thereof. Feelings there are, but no one who feels.
But we take ownership of it.
Yes, and the we that takes ownership of it is just another sensation, because there is no we. So a thought comes, and I take ownership of it. That's duality. You see, no. That's how it feels like. A thought comes, and then a sensation comes of an I taking ownership of it. But that's just another sensation. There's nowhere one in here having that thought, having that sensation. There's no one separate from the thought itself, from the sensation itself.
Yet despite that, it can physically affect you, can't it? It can tire you out, make you feel...
No, tiredness can arise, affliction can arise. It can't tire you out. There is no you to be tired out, but tiredness can arise. It cannot afflict you. There is no one who can be afflicted, but a sense of feeling afflicted can arise. And then what we do is we put some kind of central core, well, this is who I really am. I'm that central core that all this has happened to. No, that central core doesn't exist. There is no self.
Why do you use the word love when love is like a quality of
Yeah.
something as synonymous with emptiness?
It seems to be a better word than custard, I guess. It's not synonymous with, what do you say? It's synonymous with emptiness.
Yeah.
It's not synonymous with emptiness. Language really fails. So, you could shoot me down for saying this, but it's about the best I can do. So I'm going to say that love is the quality of emptiness. In other words, and again you might have come across this phrase many times before, it's a full emptiness. Now I know that sounds paradoxical and I can't help it, but there is something, in the seeing of this, there's a recognition it is absolutely empty. It's just a passing shadow. It's like those flickering lights on the cinema screens, and yet it's full of unconditional love. Yeah. And if anyone doesn't like that phrase, it's just a phrase, find a different one.
What about hatred?
What about it?
That's the opposite of love.
Yeah, it's not the opposite of unconditional love, though. I'm going to make an assertion here, right? Unconditional hatred, nah. Hatred's always conditional. The kind of love that we experience as embodied individuals is also always conditional. It's never unconditional. But what we're talking about here, I'm not talking about an abstract. I'm not doing theology here. I'm not doing a airy-fairy theology. You know, I'm talking about something which absolutely can be apprehended directly, but not while I'm there to apprehend it. But if this collapses, then it can be seen that, if you like, the underlying stuff, I want to say the underlying structure, that doesn't quite work, the underlying stuff of the universe is unconditional love. Hatred is always conditional. Anger is always, well no, not, I won't say that about anger, because anger is a raw feeling. So conditional, unconditional doesn't apply, it's a sensation.
Richard, you mentioned about that we're kind of trying to find a way home, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the kind of raison d'etre of that underlying love? Is that part of its nature, in a sense, to call us back, or is that just part of the story or the personhood?
I love that. I think it's great, but it is a kind of story,
Right.
in a way, isn't it? I mean, we can have it if we like. It's a lovely story, but it's a sort of, if you like, it's an unnecessary, I want to say the word imposition. It's an unnecessary imposition on the simplicity of this. And it's really simple. Yes, and then we want to make a story, but it's natural to do that, and that's a lovely story. And I think, you know, for the individual, the one who feels like an individual, a person or whatever, I think it's a beautiful story, you know, that somehow, no matter how lost I am, you know, there is, you know, this nature of reality is unconditional love, and it's calling me home. Yeah, in a way. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's also a story, of course. Yeah.
I've heard it said before that birth and death are ultimately the same thing. I don't know if that's a view that you subscribe to, or you said it, or if
I'd have to know what whoever said that meant by it before I could take issue or agree with it. I'm not quite sure what that, you know, but in a way, I mean, in a way, everything is the same. Everything is simply what's happened. Everything's simply an outflow of. It's the mind that differentiates. It's, so, you know, whatever difference there is between birth and death, it's the mind that says so. It couldn't be anything else. I mean, a difference is something conceptual, and it's only the mind that conceptualizes. And when I say that, again, I'm glossing over the fact there isn't such a thing as a mind. There is just this flow, you know, which appears to give, which gives rise to the appearance of there being a mind behind it. If you like, you know, there is no separation between the mind and the thought, or the mind and the feeling, or the mind and the apprehension. There is just the thought, the feeling, the apprehension.
But there's no ending to that flow. There's no death in terms of that flow. There's no birth or death in relation to that. It's just always here.
Well, there's no time, so the always kind of collapses as well. Yeah. One of the things I often say, kind of this assertion that there's no time, you know, on one level sounds like the most ludicrous assertion there could be. You know, there's memory here. I'm assuming there's memory. None of you were brought here by carers, so I'm assuming that there's memory there. You know, there's memory here of a house that I left at 9:30 this morning. Time, you know, got on the train. Memory. And so, you know, there seems to be time. It seems to be quite obvious that there's time. And yet, in another sense, and you may disagree with this, but in another sense, I'm going to assert it is actually obvious that there is no time, there is just this. I mean, that's a phrase you may have heard many, many times at non-duality talks or read it in books. There is just this. In a sense, it is in the realm of what they call the bleeding obvious. You know, that we can't put a time on this. I mean, how long is this? Is it a second? Well, of course not, because a second has a beginning, a middle, and end. You know, so we could say it's timeless. I have this fancy, but it's just a fancy because I'm one of many, many people who read books about quantum physics and understand nothing of it whatsoever, but nevertheless like to think I do. I've got this fancy that maybe the smallest, you know, what they say in atomic physics, you know, the quantum physics, the smallest unit of time is Planck time, so I like to think it's Planck time, you know, it's like, but it is, it's just this, and this, and it's this, isn't it, and it's this, and it's this. And if I say there's no past, on one level it's ridiculous because you all remember leaving home this morning. If I say there's no future, it doesn't sound ridiculous, it sounds pessimistic. But you all know that you're hoping to have supper tonight or something like that. And yet, is it not equally obvious that there is literally just this? Okay? The time, let's pretend there's a flow of time, the time in which I started this sentence has gone long ago in Planck time, millions of Planck seconds, whatever they're called. You know, and the time in which I'm going to finish this sentence has not yet arrived. Oh yes, here it is. Full stop. Right? So that sentence unfolded over time, but there is it not obvious that there is just this? You know, how many times may you've heard other speakers say that? There is just this.
And they clap their hands.
They clap their hands. Yeah, absolutely. Excitedly. And it's kind of very challenging, but in another sense it's very challenging because I'm sitting here as a being who lives in time. In other words, there is memory of the past and expectation of the future. I have to live in time, and yet is it not obvious that there is just this and it's gone, and it's just this and it's gone, just this. So when I'm in a sort of somewhat poetic mood, which I am right now, I call this, you know, this is the sliver of light in the darkness. It's not quite right. I mean, actually, this is the sliver of being in non-being, but that doesn't sound quite so good. You know, there's non-being and there's non-being, and between those non-beings, there's just this sliver of light. It's gone, by the way, now. There's this sliver of light. Oh, it's gone again. Now there's this sliver of light.
So memory, is that just dead matter?
I wouldn't call it dead matter. But
Where does memory, you know, occur in this, just this? Because memory is...
it's another part of what's happening. There's a sensation of a hand resting on an armchair. There's a feeling that maybe another sip of water would be nice. There's a memory of leaving the house this morning and tripping over the cat or whatever.
But memory is
No
about,
cats were harmed in that
memory
experiment,
is about
by the way.
past events.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
past events, absolutely. The individual lives in time. The character Tony lives in time. So the character Tony has a past. Maybe a future, we don't know, but the character Tony has a past. And one of the things that is often noticed is one of the most obvious, it's one of the most common things that's noticed when there's even just a sort of sudden awakening to this, just an awakening to the emptiness of everything, which can often be a preliminary to like what we might call a full awakening. Often what is one of the most staggering aspects of that is the recognition that it's not the recognition, it's the experience of the past being drained of its emotional content. So an embodied person, what are the various things that an embodied person is likely to carry around about the past, apart from the memory itself? All sorts of feelings, many of which our nature being what it is, thank you God, are likely to be quite negative. So regret, guilt, nostalgia, you know, sense of all sorts of wonderful goodies that we carry around about the past. And what's often reported is even just in a split second of awakening, all of that can just collapse as it's recognised that the past isn't real. Which doesn't mean it's forgotten. It doesn't mean that the information disappears. It means that the past is drained of its emotional
It has
claws.
no purchase.
It no longer can get its claws into us. It no longer has a purchase to it. Yeah. Yeah, so in a very, very good metaphor from an extremely good book about this, which modestly prevents me from mentioning the title because I wrote it myself, there is this description about how to the person, you know, with all their neuroses and so forth, the past is like a kind of three-dimensional model. And it's like a model village, for example, that you pay money to go and see. The point being that with a three-dimensional model you can get into it and you can run around in it and it has a source of reality. That's what we do as people with the past, unless we're very, very well balanced. We get nostalgic, we get regretful, we're full of guilt, whatever it might be, or resentment, whatever it might be, and we revisit the past and we get inside the model village and we run around and we look at the little model church and we go, yeah, that's where my bastard parents had me baptised without asking, or whatever it might be, whatever the unforgiveness might be. And that when there's an opening to this, when there's an awakening, that model village becomes like a two-dimensional painting. And the point about a two-dimensional painting is that all the information in the three-dimensional model is in the painting, but you can't get into it and run around in it.
I did have a glimpse many, many years ago of that. It was like everything was under a glass pane, and so there was no purchase. You try to get hold of it, but you just skidded off it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very good phrase. The past loses its purchase on it, on us. So those feelings that keep us addicted to going back into the past, like regret and guilt. So let's just stop with regret and guilt. That'll do. They tend to die, or at least very, very much diminish. Even just with even a split second of awakening will do that, can do that.
But then many years later, I'm back stuck inside a 3D model again, yeah.
Are you? Right, okay.
Oh, yes, with knobs on, mate.
Right, okay. But that can just drain out of it. It's just like and it's just analogies, but again, like the colours draining out of a picture, so that it's no longer so vivid. Because as most of us know, to whatever extent neurosis has a grip of us, then the colours of the past tend to be very vivid, very full of life. Yeah.
I'm interested in this kind of unconditional love you talk about, because it kind of suggests, really, by its very nature, that everything is included. Yeah? Nothing can be left out. Even the delusion that I'm separate, the separate self in space and time. So it's almost like there's a play that's happening with this energy, whatever it is. It's having the last laugh, as it were.
Yeah.
In this drama,
Yeah. But it's not a wicked laugh, it's a loving laugh. Yeah.
Sometimes it feels a bit wicked.
It feels like it. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes it feels brutal.
Of course, absolutely, which is one of the reasons this is what I'm saying is such a challenge to the mind. Of course, and the mind is fully entitled to that. What do you mean, unconditional love? Look at the state of the world, excuse me. To which, the only reply that can be made is, I'm sorry, When it's seen, it's seen. Yeah. I mean, I like the yogic description that, you know, this is Sat-Chit-Ananda. What does this consist of, Sat-Chit-Ananda? And, you know, I'm sure some people might argue with, you know, my glossing of it, but I'll stick to my glossing, you know. And again, I kind of assert that we're once again, in some senses in the realm of the bloody obvious. You know, so Sat-Chit-Ananda, energy, consciousness, bliss is often used, unconditional love. I'll use those interchangeably. If you don't like that, that's fine. You know, but some of that, well, I would assert that two out of that, that's the real Holy Trinity. Forget, you know, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. You know, when did two masculines and a neuter ever create anything out of nothing? That's a sort of interesting idea. So we'll sort of, you know, leave that one aside. But the Holy Trinity I'm talking about, I assert that two of those elements are just absolutely in the realm of the bleeding obvious. You know, energy, there's something happening. So there's obviously energy. You know, without energy, nothing can happen, and there is something happening, even if it's only this voice going gab, 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 and then there's a finger moving there, and a head slightly nodded there. Something's happening, so there's energy. Sat-Chit-Ananda, it's known that it's happening, right? Obviously it's known that it's happening because gabbing's going on about it. Again, so there's Sat and Chit. I can't even remember which is which. It doesn't matter. Who cares? You know. But there's energy, and it's a weasel word, and we can come back to it if you want to. But I'll just for ease of explanation at this point, I'll stick with consciousness. So there's energy and there's consciousness. And then Sat, whether you want, Ananda, whether you want to make that bliss or unconditional love, doesn't matter. Not so bloody obvious, is it? You look around at the world. Oh yeah, look around at the world, there's plenty of energy there, and there's awareness of what's going on, so there's plenty of consciousness there, but, you know, excuse me, unconditional love, that is not so obvious. So again, the assertion from here is, and you're welcome to disagree with it, but the assertion from here is that can only become obvious when the self collapses.
Can everyone's self collapse? Can everyone's self collapse?
Yes.
Everyone.
Yes.
Dogs, animals.
Oh, everyone. When you said everyone, I assumed you meant human beings. Dogs, you have to ask my friend here, who knows more about dogs than I do.
Do they have a soul?
I doubt it.
You doubt it, okay.
I don't. Well, souls are a whole other area.
Yeah.
We can go into souls if you like, but we haven't yet. You know, souls. I mean, souls. Let's keep it simple for now.
Right,
Let's
so
keep the souls
humans,
out of it.
can every human,
Yes.
their self collapse?
Yes.
No matter if you're mental, disabled, anything.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes. And there are some humans for whom that sense of separation, that sense of separated self, never actually really fully, well, we could say where their sense of themselves being separate never fully separated out. So they never fully lost that sense of unity into which we could say we're all born. We could say we're all born into a sense of unity. But of course we don't know it because the baby doesn't have a kind of knowing in that sense. So there do seem to be some individuals who never lost that sense, or certainly never lost it completely. I've met a few of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a state of liberation, that, or is there a secondary thing that needs to happen in terms of the recognition of that?
No, it doesn't need to happen. No, it doesn't need to happen.
So those individuals, for example, would know that they are just consciousness or unconditional love, you know, experiencing everything as it is.
I think from accounts and also from talking to a few individuals like this, the experience is partly of weirdness, of not fitting in, of not knowing of not really. I mean, one particular person I'm thinking of, who I had quite long conversations about this, could sort of just never get. I've heard a few other individuals say similar things as well. Could just never really get what all the excitement was about, what all the drama was about, and what that can do is it can kind of create difficulties growing up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like you don't do so well because you can't understand why everybody's getting so kind of het up about stuff.
You don't fit in, yeah.
You don't fit in.
Yeah.
So quite often it can, well, I don't think it does happen often, but I think it can, when it does happen, it can produce a kind of, it's it's obviously not great for personal ambition when the person isn't really there.
So can a story overlay that in terms of, I'm not fitting in, there's something wrong with me, maybe I need psychiatric help, for example?
Oh, absolutely,
Right,
could do, yeah. Awakening can sometimes give rise to that.
Yeah.
If
it's not kind of conscious, as it were.
Yeah. If there's no reference points, there's nothing you've read, there's no one you can talk to about it, definitely, yeah. I mean, the best known case of this is, forgotten her name,
Susan Segal.
What?
Susan Segal.
Susan Segal.
Yeah.
Who wrote a book called
Collision with the
Infinite. Yeah, where exactly this happens. She doesn't know what's happening to her. She doesn't come across anyone who knows what's happening to her for a long time, and she is seriously disturbed by it until she eventually comes across a Buddhist who's able to diagnose her, if you like, diagnose her awakening, you could say.
I'm thinking also of Russell Williams.
No, I don't know. Go on.
It was in the 1930s, 40s. He had an awakening, a profound awakening, looking after some horses in a circus, and completely the self died, and he was looking out through the horse's eyes, as it were, and he travelled around trying to find some kind of anyone to tell him what had happened, and was really on the edge of kind of like depression, really, and he came across a guy who was set up the Manchester Buddhist Society in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And suddenly he realised what had happened to him, and everything changed on that recognition. He knew something had happened, but it wasn't until he'd had that confirmation or that recognition that a sort of deeper realisation maybe happened. I don't know,
Yeah.
But he was able to live with it.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, he was luckier than people in earlier times, where if you had a mystical, let's call this mystical, I sometimes call this the mystical apprehension. If you had a mystical awakening during sort of fiercely Christian times, you'd probably be executed. So, my favourite medieval mystic, Marguerite Porete, was executed by the church because she was saying things, but obviously they couldn't. Until I see that I am nothing, I cannot see that I am everything. Until I see that I am nothing, I cannot know that I am God. Excuse me, what did you just say? So they executed her, they executed others. Julian of Norwich managed to kind of get away with just being walled up for the rest of her life because she was dutiful and compliant. But the church certainly recognised that what she was saying was dangerously undermining their authority. In the same case as Marguerite Porete, not just because of what she was saying, but also because it was coming from a woman. But they came to an accommodation with Julian of Norwich. She was compliant, and she just turned into what they call it, when you get walled up, a catamite, is it? I can't remember.
I've been there though. I visited the cell.
Did you? Yeah.
Lovely energy.
Yeah. Yeah. And many other cases, and of course, you know, there are plenty of places in the world today where you could not possibly have a meeting like this. You know, and anybody who talked like this would be executed. You know, that's not an exaggeration.
But what is it about the recognition? You know, I'm sure you know, over many years you've had lots
Can
of
I
people.
just throw in quickly,
Yeah.
by the way, that, you know, what explains the executions is because the recognition by the authorities that when people start talking about this and when this is seen, you know, it just overthrows all authority. It overthrows every authority. Yeah, so
That place of recognition, I mean, no doubt you've had lots of people contacting you, Richard, about their shifts, their awakenings.
Yeah.
What is it about that recognition where there's something that needs to be confirmed about it? You know, you know something's happened, but it's almost like there's a deeper reality to the experience once it's been communicated and heard and you know, energetically almost kind of confirmed in some way, or recognised. What is that?
I'm not sure that it always is necessary in all cases, but it's certainly very common.
Yeah.
I think one reason may be because you know this is beyond explanation, beyond description, and explanation. It's beyond description, but it's not. You know, unless we're talking about a case where that separate self never really formed in the first place, it is not going to be whatever's expected.
Right.
You know, and there's bound to be some sort of expectation. You know, I mean, we can sort of satirise it. Oh, well, when I'm enlightened, there'll be this golden aura that everybody will recognise. Beautiful women will not only throw themselves at my feet, but they'll do so having stepped out of a Ferrari that they presented to me. Yeah, and we see this acted out in that wonderful game of transference and counter-transference that goes on between the big gurus, as it were, and their kind of adoring devotees. So, you know, you see this acted out, you know, you want to see this acted out, you just go on YouTube and watch a Muji video, or in earlier times an Osho video, or whatever. You know, so there's that kind of, you know, divine dance of projection and transference and counter-transference and so forth.
Do you think those guys are ultimately talking about the same thing that we're talking about here?
Ultimately, yes. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. But the dance, the film that's showing, you know, is, as it were, the theatre that's going on around it is a very different kind of theatre show. But yeah, ultimately at the heart of it, yeah. Yes. I think so. I have no reason to think not. Yeah. But it just then gets caught up in a great big story of projection and counter-projection, transference and counter-transference.
Most people report a sense that the self is sort of uprooted in a sort of blaze of light, and then they spend the rest of their lives in a sort of non-dual, sort of stabilised non-dual place. Or is most people's experience that the non-dual is something that keeps persisting and then being, and then the self sort of reclaims itself, and then you find the non-dual perspective again?
Well, that last description, I mean, I think that, you know, for some characters, you know, it could feel like that, but that's just kind of the drama going on, you know, as the play continues. The play continues until there's physical death. You know, but I think, you know, if this has been seen, you know, there's something underneath that knows, you know, and then the drama goes on, you know. And I mean, often what can happen, I mean, if you, for example, often what can happen is that there can be this blessed period, you know, when this is, you know, I mean, when unconditional love is seen, it's you know, it is likely to have quite a profound effect on the character who remains, unless there's been a fatal heart attack at the same time. You know, and it can leave a profound afterglow. But it's unlikely that that profound afterglow will last, you know, forever, unless the person goes under a bus in a couple of weeks, in which case it might. So there can come in a feeling that something was gained and has now been lost. Now actually nothing was ever gained, because there was never anyone to gain it, and therefore nothing can have been lost. But nevertheless it's understandable why the character, who is still apparently living their life, you know, might feel like that. And at such times, sometimes, you know, a phone call to, you know, I don't know, somebody like Tony, for example, or whoever, you know, can kind of produce a sense of, oh no, that's okay, and a sort of sense of relief. But so there could be expectations. So in the afterglow of an awakening event, or the dropping of the self or whatever, there can be a kind of mental expectation. This, you know, this blissful feeling, for example, whatever it might be, should now continue forever. Good luck with that.
Clinging.
It won't. So then, you know, just a little bit of communication with others who've, it's not a path, but others who've not walked the path because it isn't a path, others who've walked the pathless path, whatever, you know, can kind of sort that out, yeah.
So the state of bliss doesn't last forever, but there's the recognition, or whatever you want to call it, is that kind of always there in the background?
Yes, in a way, that's a good way of putting it, yeah. I shouldn't be touting my own books as much as I am starting them, but I can't help it. So it's a very good little book, which I highly recommend, and it says something like, you know, this is not about enduring bliss, for that try Prozac, heroin, or a lobotomy.
Is that Hope I Die Soon?
Yeah.
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 Hope You Die Soon.
Yeah. But if we've kind of done our reading and been to our groups and joined maybe this Buddhist group and that meditation group or whatever, we probably will have worked up a whole set of expectations, which is one of the reasons why awakening can be so shocking, as those expectations are suddenly all blown apart. Yeah.
Kenneth Madden talks about it as ordinary. This is the most ordinary thing in the world, seeing it, you know.
Yes.
And that goes completely counter to what I've always understood it to be, really. It sounds like the most spectacular, extraordinary thing that could ever happen, really.
Yeah, I would say natural rather than, I mean,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
for me the word would be natural. When it's seen, I mean, it, you know, it can be just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Kenneth Madden says the fuck word loads of times.
Yeah.
He gets into it.
Yeah, well, yeah, what the fuck? Just, you know, and I think for a seeker, maybe what the double fuck? Because for a seeker, you know, whether it's recognised or not, there has to be that kind of, somewhere in here, this feeling, apprehension, thought, it's got to be about the transformation of me. There's no way that can't be there in some form. It's got to be about the transformation of me. So the recognition, it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. Has the recognition that actually me doesn't even exist to be transformed. It's got to be, it's quite likely to be accompanied by a few fucks.
But it's always a surprise, because it's got nothing to do with you.
Yes.
Because it's a surprise.
Yeah.
That's its nature, it's a surprise.
Yeah. Because as a seeker, by definition, it is me who's been seeking. Because if there wasn't a me there, there'd be no seeking. You know, so by definition, if they're seeking, it's me who's seeking, so there must be the assumption that it's me who finds. No, there can be no finding till the me collapses, and then it's, can't really call it a finding.
So how can it recognise it? Like, how can it, if I'm not me, how can it recognise?
Yeah, I can't answer that question. All I can say is that's what we're talking about here. If you like, we're talking about, you know, one. I mean, this is a kind of image that I've heard Tony use. You know, it's like, you know, oneness is hiding from itself. It's playing a game of hide and seek. It's hiding from itself, and then it recognises itself. But it's hiding from itself so well that it forgets that it's hiding from itself. So when it finds itself, it really is a delightful surprise. If it was a conscious game, it wouldn't be much of a game, would it? You know, it's like, another way of putting this is, you know, we have forgotten who we really are. We have forgotten what we really are. And then it's rediscovered.
And what we are is nothing.
What we are is nothing and everything. I talk about this, it's nearly tea break, so I'll throw this in. I mean, I talk about this a lot. Maybe, if we want to, we can come back to it after tea, right? This is going to sound awfully dualistic and very not non-dual. Often there are two phases of seeing. I mean, this sounds like a story because it is a story, but there's no other way of, you know, blah blah blah, words and all of that. There are often two events or phases of seeing you can see. In the first, the emptiness of everything is seen, right, but not the fullness. What is that fullness? We've already mentioned that, unconditional love. So just everything is seen as empty, but not just empty, not empty and full of unconditional love. I mean, again, the Buddhists are very, very good at describing this, you know, that there is just empty phenomena, like clouds passing by, that's just empty phenomena. So in that awakening, that's directly seen, not understood, directly seen. That that's empty, this is empty, this is empty, everything's empty. And that can produce, I'm going to use the word wisdom, it can produce a lot of wisdom in that it can kill off very suddenly a lot of really crap ideas. So it's not like, oh, suddenly all of this kind of extra wisdom has alighted on me. It's not that. It's that all these crap ideas have disappeared, and so how life actually is becomes much clearer. But it's not totally clear because there's something missing. But what's missing can't be known until and unless there's this other awakening. These don't have to happen like this, but often it does. So what's missing can't be known until and unless there's this, what we call second awakening, which is where everything is seen. Yeah, it is empty, absolutely empty, but it's also full. And that's where the unconditional love is seen.
So, quickly, is this in the right place? Am I? Not me, but...
What?
Am I in the right place?
There's no such thing as the right place or the wrong place, because there is only what is. You know, and in a sense, I mean, you know, that's a bit. No, it's not naughty of me to say that, you know, but in a sense, you could say, I mean that in a sort of philosophical sense, but in another very obvious sense, you know, this is what's happening, and nothing can ever be other than what it is.
So everything's always right in a way.
So, well, yes. So you are in the right place. Everything is always right in a way, except that both of those statements are stories of the mind. So not really. All we can say is, this is what's happening. Oh, so it's the right place for me to be. I'm always in the right place. Yeah, that's a nice story as well. I love that story. But it's a story of the mind. Everything that the mind says is a story.
Me being interested in non-duality is a story as well then?
Of course. It's the story. What's your name?
Max.
Max. It's the story of Max, yeah. Max is a young man who's interested in non-duality. Of course it is, yeah. Now, if we want to embellish that story, make it more interesting, we can now start talking about why Max, of all people in the world of your age, why is Max interested in non-duality, whereas Philip and Fred and Ethel aren't? You know, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And we can create a lovely story about that. But it's just a story.
But then, quickly, but Richard, you, having no self is also a story then.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's all...
It doesn't even make that, I don't know.
Is it,
Everything that's put into words is a story.
could it be said it's just what's happening?
Yes. Everything is just what's happening. Yeah. Yeah, and that just sounds a bit dismissive, so we can take that out of the sentence, if you like. Everything's what's happening.
There was a very good film called Warfare on the cinemas, and it basically just portrayed what happened. There was no goodies, there was no baddies, there's no villains, there's no heroes. And someone wrote it and said, I couldn't see the point of this film. Well, there was no point, it was just, this is what happened.
Yeah.
That was it, you know? And it was a very truthful from what the soldiers themselves said. But there was absolutely no point to it. There was no villains, there was no goodies, or, you know, there's no...
Yeah.
Nothing, yeah, it's just, this is what happened, end of, no
And the point of life is there is no point to it. It doesn't need it. Not, there is no point to life, let us now all go and collapse into nihilistic despair and kill ourselves. It's not that. There is no point to life because it is already so full it doesn't need a point. And to add a kind of point to it, like some sort of, you know, philosophy or goal that we're moving towards, it's almost like it's an insult to the richness of life.
The point is,
Life doesn't need that.
and yet people always want to say, we won. That's a very common point, isn't it? I won, we won.
Well, yeah, that's the human psyche.
Yeah.
That's the embodied self. You know, the self feels separate, so the self has a sense that it can win or it can lose. Of course, yeah. Yeah.
You say something about the body in... Oh, have we got time? Or do you
Well, I'll tell
maybe
you what,
afterwards?
when people ask questions at this time, sometimes I say, if it's a good question, a really interesting
I can't
question, we'll
guarantee
keep
it'll be a
it.
good one.
So you ask the question, then we'll make a judgment of it. And if we consider it good enough to keep hold of till after tea, we will. If we think it's trivial and trite, we'll deal with it now.
Okay.
How about that?
All right, fine. So, place of the body. Tony talks about, you know, the kind of these shifts of consciousness of being sort of like an energetic kind of reconfiguration. Yeah. Can you say something about the importance of the body in terms of those movements? You know, I'm assuming that he's talking about a place that includes the body experientially, that something happens that's felt to be, wow, this is affecting this body, this form, as it were.
Yeah, let's leave that till after tea. I think that's an interesting enough.
Glad I got there. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was
yeah,
good
you
enough.
made it. You joined the list of people. It's a very short list of people who answer the question. You know, interesting enough for it to be delayed till after tea.